America is an amazing country filled with wonderful people who do incredible things. But too often, the media and liberal politicians ignore big parts of our nation and the people who make it work. So I'm speaking with leaders and policymakers who deal with real problems every day. I'm Ronna McDaniel, and this is Real America. Today, I'm going to be speaking with House Minority Whip Steve Scalise. We're going to cover everything from his ongoing recovery from the horrific shooting at the congressional baseball practice and the events of that day, to his role as whip and the importance of taking back the House. I'm so excited to have Steve Scalise here on my podcast. Welcome to Real America.
Hey, thanks, Ron. It's great to be with you.
It's so great to be with you. I think you're just such a great person. I've gotten to know you in the past 5 years as chair, but I do want to introduce our audience to you a little bit more. Tell us about your life story. I think your family started in real estate, you were in the state legislature, and then you ended up being in Congress. But first of all, you're from Louisiana, and tell us how you ended up here.
It was not an expected journey. I was a student at LSU, and Ronald Reagan was president. And when I registered to vote, I was registered as Republican and just loved Reagan's vision for the country. And our state had a lot of problems. Louisiana was always a blue state. We had a lot of kind of a reputation for corruption, a lot of things that I didn't like seeing as a student. A lot of my friends that graduated had to leave the state to get better opportunities. And I just, while I was there, I said, we need to do more to try to take our state back. And we had, at the time, the largest college Republican chapter in America.
I didn't know that.
Over 3,000 dues-paying college Republicans in a state that was heavily blue. And kind of a good message for, I talk to friends in states that are really heavily blue now, and they get disenchanted. And I say, you've got to work at the ground level and, start with young people. Look at college Republicans. And then you see a state like Virginia where they did take their state back.
That's so
Louisiana
true.
Took our state back. And, and I was a volunteer. I worked on campaigns. Never thought I would run. And finally they said, well, okay, there's a state legislative seat opening up. Scalise, go and, go. You should actually get in the game here. And I didn't think I would do it. And finally they talked me into it, and we won big. Running a grassroots campaign, and I love state and national issues, and ultimately ran for Congress. And it's been a treat to be able to serve in the United States Congress. And look, we were part of taking a majority back in 2010. We're working incredibly hard to be a part of taking the majority back again in 2022, and I think we have a great opportunity. But every day you get to serve in the United States Congress and be a part of trying to make this country better. It's a treat.
Well, you do such a great job. And what year were you elected to Congress the first?
2008, in a special election. Bobby Jindal had gotten elected governor of Louisiana, and then I got elected to fill the remainder of that term in 08.
So you have seen a lot of change. I mean, has it become as vitriolic and partisan as we all think? I mean, have you seen that transition from 2008 to now, or is it maintained?
Yeah, and when you study politics, going back decades ago, the parties always worked together. You hear about the stories of Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. They did not see eye to eye on a lot of things. Tip was kind of a classic Boston Union liberal, and Reagan was that great bold conservative, and yet they worked on big things. They saved Medicare and Social Security and extended the life of Social Security for another 25 years because they were able to work together to do big things. It's really broken down a lot over the last few years, and I do think the way that Speaker Pelosi's handled COVID, where she still has all of these virtual meetings. Committees need to be meeting in person again.
Yep.
The House needs to get rid of proxy voting, where you've got dozens of people on any given night that just don't show up in person. They've got somebody else casting their vote for them. And when you lose that ability for people to be in a room together, in a committee room, Republicans and Democrats do work through some of the complicated issues. And right now you had a $1.9 trillion spending bill right out the box that wasn't needed, that only added inflation. That bill went through committees, multiple committees. Not one amendment was allowed in any of the committees. And so you don't, the
Why
Speaker—
weren't amendments allowed?
Well, because Nancy Pelosi wanted to write the bill herself.
Okay.
You saw the $4.5 trillion spending bill that passed, devastating for our economy, raises taxes on families. It's going to increase inflation. Not one amendment was allowed on probably 8 different committees it went through. She didn't allow any of her own chairmen. Forget about Republicans trying to make changes. We tried to make a lot of changes. She didn't let her own members make changes because she likes running a top-down structure where the Speaker controls everything.
That's
and they
so
let her get away
interesting.
with it, but it breaks the process down because you don't fix some of the problems that you could work through between Republicans and Democrats. She doesn't want any of of that, and we've got to get away from that again.
She has been the single most divisive figure in American politics, I believe. And I think you just made a point that I don't think many people recognize. Because you're doing proxy voting, you're not coming together. There's no ability to be collegial, to talk to each other, to work through issues. And she is dividing through separation, physical separation, our country even more by allowing this to continue. As frontline workers are still having to go to the hospital, grocery store workers are still going to work, parents are still having to work, but she's saying, Congress, it's not safe for you here.
Right.
It's crazy.
And all the science says kids need to be in the classroom.
Yep.
Not being in the classroom is actually doing long-term damage to kids, and they'll still fight to try to keep kids out of the classroom. And again, you saw the voters in Virginia. Liberals in Virginia revolted against that kind of top-down totalitarianism, and yet they're still trying to run it in Congress. And we've got to get away from it. We've got to get back to making Congress work again. We're still going to have the big issues where we disagree, but on most issues, we can actually come together and figure it out, but you have to do it in person. If you and I have an issue we're trying to figure out, if you're on the top left of a screen on a Zoom call
like
and I'm on the bottom right in the Brady Bunch, you can't go and go walk over, talk through it, figure it out, and then go and vote on that.
We don't need Hollywood squares to solve Congress. Yeah, it's so true.
We know what the problem is, and families have already figured this out. People are getting back to their normal lives, and yet they still want to fire people if they don't get vaccinated. They want to control your life. They want to shut things down again, and I think most people are so beyond that, but in Congress, they're still trying to keep that going.
She's been divisive. She's hypocritical. And I think the rhetoric's been so ramped up that we do have a really divided country, and people are clamoring for us to come together. And I do think you're signaling a change that would happen when we take back the House. But you were a victim of that. And I think that this is something that doesn't get talked about enough. Democrats are so quick to accuse Republicans and point fingers if anything goes wrong. But you had a deranged Democrat, Bernie Sanders supporter, and it's not Bernie Sanders' fault, come and attack you during your congressional practice for the congressional baseball game. I want to talk about that a little bit. First of all, how are you doing?
Well, appreciate it. I'm doing great.
Yeah.
Look, I still do physical therapy about once a week. I had to learn how to walk again, but I still got some long-term nerve damage and work to get balance. I want to run again. I can't run right now, but I'm working on all that, and I get better all the time. And look,
how did you remember a lot from that day? Do you remember everything, or is it a black?
Yeah, I remember everything that happened that morning, from the first gunshot, which at first, we're on a baseball field playing a kid's game, and I thought it was a tractor backfiring, because you're not thinking somebody's shooting a gun at us. And then another round, I was probably hit. They said by the third shot, and he had a semi-automatic rifle and a handgun, and the element of surprise. And his intention was to kill every Republican on that ball field. And God was on that ball field that day.
Yeah.
And there were miracles performed. There were heroes on that ball field. And at the end of the day, the only person that didn't make it out was the shooter. And no way, when you look at it on paper, would you think that would be the result. So a lot of miracles. I'm lucky to be alive.
Did you realize how hurt you were when you were first shot?
Not initially. I fell down because my legs gave out pretty, within seconds. But then I started crawling away from the gunfire. And after about 20 feet, somebody took a picture of a trail of blood about 20 feet into the outfield. And then everything gave out. My arms gave out. And I just lay there and I started praying. And I could hear what was going on. I couldn't really see it. But then after the shooter was taken down, a bunch of my colleagues, led by Brad Wenstrup, who was a combat surgeon in Iraq, came to kind of stop the bleeding, put a tourniquet on me, keep me alive. I would not have made it to the hospital if they wouldn't have done that. And I remember vividly all of those things. And it seemed like it took hours. It was probably a half hour before they got me on a helicopter. But I started feeling myself fading, and I was just praying, saying, please don't let me down this ball field.
Well, we're so glad you're okay. And there were other people shot that day too. There were 4 other victims. Are they all doing okay?
Everybody's doing great.
Okay.
And, look, again, we're all blessed. But it could have turned out a lot differently, too. And if it wasn't for Capitol Police, who were on that ball field that day, when they talk about defunding the police, one of the craziest ideas I've ever heard of, in a town where there's a lot of crazy ideas, that's probably the worst of them. How many people every day in communities are alive because police risk their lives to keep us safe. And if it wasn't for David Bailey and Crystal Griner, who were the Capitol police officers with me, then the Virginia police who showed up later and ultimately confronted and took down the shooter, he had free reign over all of us, and his intention was to take us all out. So it's one of those things where you say, look, anybody who dares to embrace that movement, I'll take that on every day.
Well, it's not just defunding the police, too. They're preventing police from doing their job by not prosecuting crimes. We're seeing this huge crime wave across the country.
Smash and grab is another component of that now. Yeah.
Part of their defunding the police takes away officers from schools that definitely need protection for kids. I mean, so much of that goes into that. But I will say, it was a bipartisan moment supporting you. After that shooting, you had everyone show up at the LSU class at the first congressional game. And Nancy Pelosi was there every step of the way. And we didn't point fingers. It wasn't, oh, look at the Democrats. But now you have the reverse from the Democrats. Everything that happens, it's Republicans. How dare you say anything about elections or issues? You're causing all these things. And even with the January 6th Commission, and I think it's really important to understand, Republicans wanted to look at all violence and have a broader commission to say what's causing violence across all spectrums, like we saw with the BLM protests over the summer. We want to see everything that's happening. And Democrats said no, and they didn't even let you appoint your people to the committee. What do you think about that?
Right, and it just shows that they want to control everything. They don't want both sides of the story being told. There is a desire you see on some of their parts to just want perennial victimhood. I don't look at myself as a victim. I'm lucky. God gave me a second chance, and yet they only wanted to look at one side of the story when we were saying, look, if you want to look at political violence, there was a whole lot of political violence that went unchecked during the summer, where they were killing cops, where they were beating people in the streets, burning down buildings.
Destroying businesses,
they didn't want to look at any of that. And so then Kevin McCarthy makes the picks of the Republicans that would have served on that commission, and Pelosi rejects all of them, which was unprecedented. That had never happened before in over 240 years of Congress. And again, breaks down the system, where she wants to control everything. That's not where America is, by the way. They're rejecting this all across the board in states where you wouldn't think. And, look, Minneapolis, the people of Minneapolis voted against defunding the police when the Democrat leaders wanted to defund the police. And so it shows you they're way out of touch, not only with mainstream America, they're out of touch with Democrat voters in a lot of these states. And we're going to work to get it back. And we're not just going after Republican votes and independent votes. There are a lot of Democrats that are coming our way, too, because of this.
That's so true. And I think it's important to understand how much Democrats have contributed to the environment we have right now, with not bringing Congress back to vote in person, with defunding the police, with doubling down, with a January 6th commission that doesn't have the minority able to appoint their members. I mean, on so many levels, it's unprecedented how much Nancy Pelosi wants total and complete power. You have a critical role in the House. You are the whip. Tell us what that means. I think a lot of people don't know what that role is, and what do you do in this position?
Yeah, it's one of those questions people ask a lot. When I first got elected whip, the show House of Cards was still on, and I think that's how people knew or what their view of the whip was. And I hadn't even seen the show, so I had to go start watching it.
Good point.
Like by the third episode, he pushes a reporter into the subway. I'm like, whoa, that's not what we do. It really is a great job because you get to know all of the members, because the job of the whip, and when you break it down, is to make sure if a bill's coming to the floor when we're in the majority, you need 218 votes to pass the bill.
Yes.
You better make sure the bill has the votes to pass. When you're in the minority, there's still things that either we might be working together on a bill, we might be working against a bill, but it's making sure that we can stay as unified as possible and knowing where members are so there are no surprises when it comes to a big vote on the House floor. And so you're always in communication with our members on every end of the political spectrum, whether it's the most conservative, the middle of the road, the moderates, wherever they are, you're talking to all of them to try to find out where they are, to try to sway them to where we're trying to get to on a big vote like
do you
that.
have to have them over for dinner ever and be like, hey?
You have a lot of conversations. Look, I'm from New Orleans. We love, cooking, eating, and you're doing it in a lot of ways. Sometimes you're on the House floor and you're finding them wherever they are, and you go sit next to them and talk to them. You're calling them, texting them. going to dinner just to get to know them better, to understand why they tick, and figure out how we can all come together.
It's such a
on big
huge
things.
role to get to know. So tell me about this new freshman class. We added, 15 new members, maybe more than that now, veterans,
Yeah, we flipped
women.
15 seats from
flipped
Democrat
15.
to Republican,
Yeah.
and elected over 30 new
members. So
Republicans.
tell me about this new
Phenomenal
class.
members.
Are
So
they easy to whip?
largest number of women
Yep.
elected as Republican in probably 100 years. We have more minorities. We really worked to get a more diverse Republican class, and they're wonderful people. They're adding a lot to the debate. And in the end, you don't have the mainstream media trying to amplify our conservative message, as you know, but getting out into communities, talking in your local papers about issues, using social media where they're not trying to shut you down. There's ways to get conservative messages out. And these new members have gotten right into it. I mean, they're not sitting on the sidelines. They didn't say, well, I'll come out, I'll take my first year off and then get in. They got in right away. And you think about, you talk about January 6th, you talk about what this year has been like for these freshmen. The first year as a freshman, they're not freshmen anymore. They've seen everything, and they've been responding well. We, by the way, as we're recruiting for the November election, we are getting the same kind of quality people. A lot of people with military background, a lot of people that know what's at stake. You're not coming up here for some cushy title and, hanging out, and, you're coming up here to literally defend the freedoms that this country was based upon against people who want to move to big government socialism. And they're moving in a very aggressive way. We've got to push back and get people that are willing to have that same passion on the conservative side, and we're getting it.
So this class is a fun class. And a lot of the people probably don't realize 2020, as much as we have angst over what's happening with Biden and Democrats, we picked up these seats in the House, and it's put us in a position where we're 5 seats away from taking back majority. Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Yes.
One, why is it so important to have the majority? I mean, we know the issues, but explain what the role of the speaker has and how critical it is to have that majority.
It's so important because the majority party controls the agenda. From the speaker on down, you control which bills come to the floor, which bills don't come to the floor. If we were in the majority, there would be no $1.9 trillion spending bill that paid people not to work and bailed out failed states. There would be no $4.5 trillion bill. There wouldn't have been a bill for a dime of new taxes in the majority. But you know what else is important, Ron? And this is where, when you look at the Biden administration and all the failures, all the crises that they created, from the border to inflation to energy to foreign policy debacles like Afghanistan, they're not having any oversight hearings because they control the majority. The ability for Congress to hold the executive branch accountable is non-existent right now. They've not had a single hearing on holding China accountable for the origin of COVID. They haven't had a hearing to find out about the origin of COVID, when many top scientists on both sides of the aisle have said it probably started in the lab in Wuhan. And it wasn't originated naturally from a bat to an animal to a human. It was probably genetically modified in that lab, possibly with some federal taxpayer money going to gain-of-function research. We ought to be having hearings on that. And you know what? When we get the majority, we will have hearings where you can bring people in, swear them in, compel testimony, and subpoena documents so the public can find out what's really going on. That's not happening right now. It absolutely will happen under a Republican majority in the House.
So I think we know how bad of shape our country is right now with Democrat leadership. I think people are really feeling it. We know about inflation. We know we're paying more. We know our kids didn't get the education they deserved. So many things are frustrating, and we have a lot to run against. We have a lot to say about the Democrats. But as Republicans, we have to run on more.
Yeah.
So what is going to be the message you think coming from House members heading into 2022 as to why we deserve the majority and what we're going to do when we get it?
Yeah, Ronna, that's probably what excites me the most. Again, as somebody who came up in politics under Ronald Reagan, that bold conservative vision, and not having these kind of pale pastels, but actually showing the country what conservative leadership looks like. We are already working on that right now. We have a lot of task forces with our members that have passions on every issue under the sun, working to put out an agenda. We had the contract with America in '94. We talked to Newt Gingrich a lot about how they rolled that out. You don't roll it out a year out, maybe around the summertime, and people are just starting to focus.
Okay.
Obviously, we're focused on the election early off. We're recruiting candidates. We're raising the money to go win the majority back. But most people across America really don't start focusing until the summer. And then you're going to start to see us rolling out that agenda to lay out what we believe in, not just how bad they are on energy prices. Why are you paying 60% more for gas? We know the answers, But let's get back to those things that worked when President Trump had America being energy dominant. When you were paying less than $2 a gallon. Wasn't that long ago. It was just a year ago.
I can remember. It was a year ago.
People remember that too, but they sometimes forget it was policies that we enacted with a Republican president, with Republican majorities to do that. Getting inflation under control again, having a dominant foreign policy where we're protecting our military, giving them the tools they need, not giving $85 billion of America's best military technology to the Taliban, which Joe Biden did.
Yep.
And again, we'll have hearings on that too to find out exactly what happened, what they have, and how that came to be. We're going to lay out an agenda to talk about how to rebuild our military, how to secure our border. Under Donald Trump, we had a secure border. And it wasn't just the wall. We were building a wall, but he had treaties in place with Mexico, with South American and Central American countries, the Northern Triangle agreements. Biden eliminated all of that on day one because he wants open borders. America doesn't want open borders. So yes, what they're doing is failing. You see the crises on every front, but how conservative policies can actually fix this and make your life better. We're going to be rolling that out, and I'm excited about it already. I think you're going to see voters, again, not just Republican voters and swing district independent voters. I think you're going to see a lot of Democrat voters saying, I love what they're talking about on a Parents' Bill of Rights, which we've been rolling out, because parents want to be involved and deserve to be involved in their kids' education. And Democrats are bowing to the big union bosses and don't want parents involved. Guess who's going to win that fight? We are.
Yep. That's so true. And I love that you guys are working on that and it's going to come out. I get asked that question a lot. And that's going to be critical because we can't just say the Democrats are bad. We have to say what we stand for. And with this leadership and what you've done, it's so critical. So you're doing the fundamentals. The recruitment's great. Fundraising's been going well. You're traveling the country. You're all over. We have the right message. We're going to win, I think. But it only happens if every person listening and watching gets involved. So what would you say to somebody who says, I'm discouraged, I don't know if my vote's going to count, Republicans are fighting each other, I don't know. What would you say to that person right now about 2022?
Yeah, and Rhonda, this is probably the seminal question for 2022 because when you look at the Georgia 2 Senate special elections where about 3% of Republican-based voters stayed at home. That alone would have made up the difference and we'd have those 2 Senate seats. We wouldn't have all this big government socialism. And yet you still hear it everywhere you go. People are concerned about the integrity of the voting system. And I point to Virginia. Again, it's important not just to look and go, hey, we won, let's just pop the champagne. Let's go and look how we won. There were people in Virginia leading up to Youngkin's great win where they were saying that same thing. Why does it matter? Why should I bother voting? You know, it's Virginia and things are going to go wrong. And so the Youngkin campaign had a voter integrity project.
Actually, the RNC did it.
And the RNC worked together hand in hand. And they said, okay, if you've got a concern about the integrity of the system, engage in the ability to make sure that the laws are carried out properly. You know, legislatures debate these laws. And if they're not carried out, that's when things go wrong. Make sure that the laws are followed and you can be a part of it. And they signed up thousands of people. Y'all were involved in that. And what it did is it channeled the energy instead of something negative where, hey, they can just have an excuse to stay at home. Nobody has an excuse to stay at home. We need people out voting.
Need everyone.
And when they go out voting and also make sure that they're protecting the integrity of the voting system, you get the right outcome. And we saw that in Virginia. And so we're going to take that model on the road too. And it helps people to remind them, look at what they did in Virginia. You could just have the cop-out answer and say, I'm going to stay at home, it won't matter. Of course it matters. Everybody's got to vote. And we fight for that right for everybody to vote, but you can't be the one that stays at home.
Yeah, the only vote that doesn't count is the one you don't cast. And we hear this all the time. I'm sure you're hearing it as, oh, I'm so frustrated. But like you said with Virginia, the RNC was key in that. We had 3,500 shifts of poll watchers before the election. Just during the 45-day early voting period, we had 500 lawyers on the ground, and we had 98% coverage of polling locations from volunteers who were willing to be.
People knew the rules. You've got to go to a training session.
You've got to
it's
do
not
that.
long.
Be an election day worker.
And people did it. Thousands of people did it.
Be a poll watcher. Be part of the solution and stop complaining about the problem. And we need that.
And by the way, you never heard a single complaint about how the election day was carried out in Virginia because it was run the right way.
Yeah, we had a hotline. We had people in Fairfax County. Oh no, Fairfax is having issues. We knew immediately because we had lawyers on the ground. So I think this is key that we as leaders are reminding people, this is the election to get involved. If you do not get involved and we do not take back the House, the future of our country is not as bright.
The only way we lose our country is if conservatives stay at home, and that's
Yep.
not going to happen. I feel it. You see the energy on the ground. I was here in 2010 when we took the House back. In 2009, by the way, right before the big Tea Party wave, we flipped Virginia from Democrat to Republican. A lot of similarities, but the energy on the ground leading into the 2010 elections, I think it's even more intense today. People are more concerned about the direction of our country because they see, back then it was liberalism versus conservatism. Today it's big government socialism. And the liberals are getting beat even in primaries by big government socialists. And I think people are paying attention to that too.
Well, I'm excited. Thank you for what you're doing and your leadership and all that you're doing to recruit candidates and raise money. You are tireless. I see you all around the country. I'm often following. Oh, I just met with Steve Scalise. I know we're kind of on the circuit together.
It's like a renewable source of energy.
I know who everybody you met with last week. We're all meeting with the same people. I do want to go back to Louisiana because you live in such an amazing state, and it is a unique state to our country. It's had some real challenges, but you are in an energy-producing state. Can you name the worst thing that Biden has done for your state? I mean, I'm sure there's so many, but is there something that really stands out from an energy standpoint that's been bad for your state?
Right. After you get over the national issues that he did that are really bad for Louisiana, but 49 other states too. And as it relates to energy specifically, I represent Port Fourchon, which is the hub of deep water drilling out in the Gulf of Mexico, where we have vast reserves. We produce a tremendous amount of the nation's energy. What he did day one coming in, not only killing Keystone Pipeline, that was more to move oil from Canada into refineries in America, but the ability to produce on federal lands. And again, this was where President Trump had said, let's open up the vast resources of America so we can eliminate OPEC as a dominant source of a cartel, a monopoly for oil production. And we did that because we opened up our resources, lowered prices, it created jobs, but it also gave our nation energy security. That all went away when Joe Biden said, we're not going to allow any kind of production on federal land. So he shut down a lot of ability for us to make our own energy, but then he went to OPEC and begged them to produce more oil there. He begged Russia, and they said no. And ultimately, this is why you're seeing dramatically higher costs for everybody across the country. But it devastated a lot of people, thousands of people that work in the energy industry. These are good jobs. These are people making over $100,000 a year that are now unemployed. And what does Joe Biden say to them? He said, oh, you can go install solar panels. Those jobs aren't there right now. And by the way, the solar panels are being made in China. And ironically, they don't use solar energy to make them. Do you know over 70% of the solar panels made in the world are made using coal-fired power? I mean, all of this stuff. You want to talk about reducing carbon emissions? America was leading the world in reducing emissions, not through mandates that kill jobs and Paris Accords, but through technology, American technology.
And innovation.
And that's what he's killed. And that innovation is what he's killed. And I think that's where people are the most frustrated because they see China's not participating in the Paris Accord. France isn't even in compliance with the Paris Accord. They want us in it because they wreck their economy. They want to wreck ours. China would love to wreck our economy in America because they get the jobs and they emit 5 times more carbon to make the same stuff. We win on the science when we take them on the science. You notice they hide on science on all these issues, whether it's COVID and mandates, whether it's carbon emissions. They just want to, the Green New Deal, they want to wreck America's economy. If pipelines were bad, why did he kill Keystone? But then Joe Biden turned around and green lights the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Russia and Germany. It's American jobs he's going after.
It's so real, but he is hurting our country. And when Trump talked about America first, every other country is for their country first.
Every other country is for their country first.
Let me just tell you something. China's for China first. Russia's for Russia first. Everybody else is for first. And for some reason, that's a bad slogan that we're saying America first.
And by the way, our allies benefited from an American first agenda too.
Freedom first.
Yes, they loved the freedom and the leadership. There are bad actors out there. Russia's moving back in on Eastern Europe. China's trying to dominate the world. Look at Taiwan. Look at Iran and the proxies. You had missiles right after Joe Biden becomes president. Thousands of missiles shot into Israel from Gaza. They won't even replenish the Iron Dome right now. Pelosi's been pulling back funding to allow Israel just to protect themselves from terrorist attacks that are aimed at Israel. This is the difference that leadership makes.
The thing that I think is so critical is to realize it's not incompetence. This is intentional. This is their worldview. Biden does not want a stronger America. He is not a doddering old fool. He is running our country, and the policies he's putting in place are intentional. And they like to blame COVID on everything. Everything's COVID's fault. when you shut down our energy producing ability in this country, it's why gas prices are up. And I think the American people are getting it, even though the media covers for
People
Biden.
inherently know why
the
this is
media will
happening.
cover for him left and right.
And Afghanistan really unveiled. He had the ability day one, day two, when he said, oh, don't worry, Afghanistan's not going to fall. And then 24 hours later, Afghanistan fell. He could have pulled it back right there. They could have retaken Bagram before thousands of terrorists were let out of that prison, including that suicide bomber who killed 13 of our soldiers. That's the kind of stuff that people watched and said, hold on, there's something else going on here. And it's alarming. It's alarming because it's not only bad for America, our allies were furious because they were left behind too. They were left holding the bag too. And many of their people died as well.
So much is at stake in this election, and I'm really optimistic that what we're going to do. I'm going to end on a light note because we were going to go to Louisiana for an RNC meeting this year, and it got canceled because of the hurricane.
We'll have you back, though, but yeah.
But there is nobody more proud of your state than you. And you were texting me all the food options. You're like, don't go to anywhere to eat without talking to me. So I know this is going to put you on the spot, but if you were going to say, like, if you're coming to New Orleans, you got to give me 2 places.
Oh my
you
gosh,
gotta go.
Thanks for not limiting me to one. The best single bite of food in the world is a charbroiled oyster. You take a raw oyster on an open flame, you throw some garlic butter and Parmesan cheese on there. Phenomenal. Go to Drago's, get a charbroiled oyster.
Drago's, you said?
Drago's, yeah. Galatoire's, it's a great classic restaurant, over 80 years old, French Creole restaurant, right on Bourbon Street, but wonderful food. I mean, you could just go all around every day, eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner at a different place.
We should create like a website for you. We should create like Steve Scalise's picks, for coming to New Orleans. But
I'll give you ideas for days. But,
next time we're going to
place.
come back in March, but I'm so excited to have you. I'm excited for what lays ahead. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for being on my podcast.
Ronna, great being with you, and thanks for your leadership too, what the RNC is doing to help us as well. We got to save America.
We're a great team. Thank you. Appreciate you. I'm Ronna McDaniel, and this is what Republicans stand for. Join us next time on Real America.